So I'd just like to introduce myself. My name is Catriona Glazebrook. I'm the Executive Director of the John Bunker Sands Wetlands Center. And at the Wetlands Center, many of you may know, some of you may not know, we have one of the largest, it's largest man-made wetland in the US. And that wetland is an area where the plants are helping to clean and filter water for millions of residents around the Dallas area through a process called phytoremediation. And then we also are a major education hub to teach ecology, science, and all kinds of wonderful outdoor field experiences to young people from 4th grade to 12th grade. So we welcome you out. We're also a visitor center, so come visit us. We're open Tuesday through Saturday. And we do offer birding tours every once in a while, as well as just boardwalk tours. It's beautiful. So come on out and visit. And I'd like to introduce to you the reason that we're doing this webinar is because we really want to bring to people's attention what's happening to birds in this country and, in fact, around the globe. And not only what's happening with the species decline, but have a positive note about what you might be able to do in your backyard to help some of the common birds and even some of the not so common birds that we have in North Texas. So our first speaker will be Rufus Stevens, who's a certified wildlife biologist. He's just come out with a great new book on land stewardship for birds of North Texas, and some great tips for homeowners and property owners on how to attract birds. And also, he's going to tell us about some of the trends that's occurring with birds as well. So welcome, Rufus.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. And what was already mentioned was the decline in birds. It was an article in Science back in 2019, which pointed out that basically it was looking especially at breeding bird survey data, but it was also things like radar, LIDAR data, or LIDAR, NEXRAD radar data, and looking at migrations. And they basically recognize that in the past, since the 70s, in the past 50 years, 3 billion total bird abundance has been lost. That's a 29% decline in birds since the 1970s, which is just really concerning. And so one of the things that we've done, myself and my co-author, we wrote a book on land stewardship for birds. And really what we want you to be is a good land steward for birds. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about a backyard or a 10,000 acre ranch. And so what I'm going to talk about real quickly is do an overview of what land stewardship is. Then I'm going to talk about birds as indicators for success. And we're going to talk about some examples of bird habitats and bird requirements. So land stewardship, basically, it's the careful or responsible management. Stewardship is the careful or responsible management of something entrusted to one's care. In this case, we're talking about land entrusted to one's care. And in Texas, private landowners have a tremendous opportunity, responsibility to help with good stewardship. And Texas, being a privately owned, primarily privately owned state, 96% of the state is privately owned. And so what private landowners do really does have an impact. So why birds? Why would we focus on birds as an example for land stewardship? Well, one is birds are charismatic. Most landowners, when you talk to them about what they enjoy about their property, they'll come around to some kind of bird as being one of the things they really enjoy. Birds also can, because they're actually diverse group of vertebrates, they are also represent diversity in the habitat. And when birds flourish, other wildlife do as well. And you can pretty easily benefit, birds can really benefit from habitat improvement. So that's an important point. And as we already alluded to, they need our help. The birds have declined. And I was going to show a graphic from that article in 2019, basically showing that birds in every type of biome in North America, and we're talking about North America, except wetlands. That was the only exception you can see there. But in every other biome, birds have declined, and in some dramatically, such as grasslands or boreal forests. One of the things they pointed out in the article was their concern about generalists, forest generalists, habitat generalists. These are usually birds that are pretty resilient to changes, but they have declined as well. And that is really concerning. The reason for the wetland increase really dates back to the 60s when waterfowl populations declined dramatically. And with the help of organizations like Ducks Unlimited and hunters' support through Duck Stamp money, but also corporate sponsors, ranchers, farmers came together, and basically there's a program put together called the North American Waterfowl Management Plan. And that radically changed things. And in the 70s and 80s, and even through to today, that has really changed and turned around the wetland, the issues with declining populations in wetlands, specifically ducks, but all kinds of other wildlife associated with it, shorebirds and such as that. So that's a bright point. What that tells us is that if we put our mind to it, we can do something about it. So that's also a bright spot in this otherwise rather bleak view of declining bird populations. So this painted bunting, and might kind of think of that as kind of the poster child for beautiful birds in Texas. And it is very much a Texas bird. This is breeding bird survey data, and Texas and Oklahoma is really the core of its habitat where it breeds. And if we look at Texas populations of painted buntings from breeding bird survey data, if that graph doesn't look bad, it is. And that's about a 30% decline in birds in painted buntings in the past 50 years. And I think if I probably asked most of y'all, you've probably seen a painted bunting. So they're still relatively common. Another bird, loggerhead shrike, and this is, again, Texas statewide breeding bird survey data. And that's about an 80% decline in the past 50 years. So there's some birds that really have declined significantly, but they still may be relatively common. And really one of the things that we want to be able to do is to avoid things like the Endangered Species Act. We'd rather keep common birds common. So another bright spot, and I don't know if I have any landowners in the audience who participate in wildlife tax valuation. And actually this includes 2017 data, and I hear the 2022 data is coming out. This is from Texas A&M Natural Resource Institute, and they have a website called Texas Land Trends. And it's really interesting. If you ever get a chance to go to it, check it out. But they haven't come out with the 2022 data. It takes them a long time to compile that data. But I heard the other day that what the number of acres under wildlife management is now around 8 million acres. So that's about the same number of acres that are being managed in timber. And so this is specifically wildlife, or this is our ag properties that are specifically being managed for wildlife. And so that's a great opportunity with the private landowners managing those properties. So one of the things, just kind of briefly, our approach to land stewardship is to go identify the habitats that you have and what are the different types that you have and the quality of those habitats. And there are different tools that you can do to identify that. And then select 2 to 3 species per habitat type, and that really represent diversity. And that can really help you guide your management. And so there are sources out there, you know, your own list or whatever. But also our book. And I will mention one thing, our book is not a field guide. It's not a plant guide, field guide. It's not a bird field guide. It's about land stewardship and how we can take care of our properties to benefit those species. So that's rather unique in that way. So, and then you determine the stewardship practice. What are the practices you need to do to improve that species? This is one of the things my co-author really loves to say is be prepared to be your own best advisors. Look and listen, ask questions, keep learning, find trusted advisors, and make science-based decisions. So there are the first 6 chapters in our book are related to habitat types. But the following 3 include these chapters on predators and other dangerous animals. These are often some of the things that are related to why we have problems with habitat. And also, you know, so another chapter on deer management, and there's cedar and brush control. And under dangerous animals are things like red imported fire ants. They decrease insect diversity, and that is critical to really almost all of our breeding birds utilize insects at one time. Cats are also a huge issue, as well as feral hogs. There are estimated to be as many feral hogs in Texas as there are white-tailed deer. And they are an exotic species brought by Spaniards and farmers. And then there's brown-headed cowbirds, which is kind of a special situation. So there's actually a master naturalist named Joey Fisher-Hine, and she is an artist, obviously very nice. This Silent Spring 4 billion one and counting. And the estimate on the impact of cats is between 2.5 billion birds annually to 4 billion, or wildlife, or birds, to 4 billion birds. And this is really significant. Actually, there are research papers where they basically looked at cat impacts in rural areas, and they found that cats could have as much impact as all other mammalian predators combined. So we're talking about foxes and coyotes, and all those that cats were doing more than that. So the main thing is here, spay and neuter your pets, keep cats indoors. If you really want to have them have an outdoor experience, use a catio. You can Google catio. So, you know, can you recognize, you know, native plant communities? These are bird habitats, and basically this is where they find food, water, shelter, and space. So one of the things that I like to point out is that we think of forbs or wildflowers, and these are important insects. Pollinators are really big these days, and there are a lot of people managing for pollinators. But forbs are also, and the insects that live on them, are food for birds. And this is really critical. This is an important component in the habitat. So just look at a couple examples of species. I'm going to look at grasslands and then also savannas. And a great grassland bird is a scissor-tail flycatcher. And you'll notice that it's a priority bird. And what we mean by priority is that it needs our assistance, that populations have declined or it's isolated and somehow. These are birds that need our help. So they need special attention. We were surprised when we were doing our book how many species needed assistance. And some of the things that we have in our book that help you manage are things like knowing the territory size, the breeding territory size. In this case, 7 to 15 acres per nesting pair. So it gives you an idea of how many you should be able to have. And then things that you can do. And so they're an insect-eating bird, so controlling that. RIFA is red imported fire ants. RIFA, so in managing fire ants is really important there. So just to give you an example, this is a good example of a healthy grassland. You can see there's forbs in the picture or wildflowers. There are a variety of different grasses. And here's an example of a grassland that is not healthy. You can't see any forbs there. It's being dominated by one exotic grass. And that is really kind of helps you understand what are we talking about when we talk about a healthy habitat. So a live oak savanna, our painted bunting again is an important bird in live oak savanna habitat. It also is a priority bird, which is pretty obvious from what we talked about earlier. 5 acres per nesting pair. And one of the important things is they nest about 3 to 5 feet off the ground. And so where we have really abundant deer populations, they can impact that level of habitat. So those layers are really important in managing for this species. So what does healthy live oak savanna look like? Well, let me back up. This is good, healthy live oak savanna. Again, layers. You see grass cover. There are forbs in that picture, but there's layers of woody plants, including tall trees. And so that whole structure there is what's really important in that habitat being healthy. And here's a picture of unhealthy live oak habitat. And not only does it not have those layers, doesn't have good grass cover or forbs, it also has, you can see those little mounds out there are red imported fire ants. So it's got an invasive and exotic species that's degrading the quality of that habitat. So what about backyards? I often sort of tongue in cheek, what are the plants often found in backyards? St. Augustine grass and live oaks. And this might be kind of a typical yard, a lot of turf grass, but and a couple of trees. But it could be so much more. And again, looking at this picture of a backyard habitat, as you can see that layer, let me back up. You can see those layers of perennials and shrubs and such as that, and that really provides good habitat for wildlife. I will mention one thing here. I mean, people think about their backyard, maybe that they can have a real impact. Well, there was a research project that was done down in San Antonio, and they looked at a neighborhood that had basically a small neighborhood that had been managed for birds, and that it was actually significantly more like the bird communities in native habitat than it was in typical backyards. Typical backyards will be mainly seed-eating birds, but these landscape for wildlife or wildscape habitats were attracting many more insect-eating birds, which was much more like native habitat, which is kind of an interesting. So you can, even in your backyard, you can really have an impact. So there's a healthy backyard with wildflowers and forbs, and grasses. And here is actually just around the corner from this place is an unhealthy one. So there is a lot that you can do even in a backyard. So the steps to stewardship were identifying your habitats and the different types and the quality, selecting the target species that you want to manage for each habitat, and we recommend 2 to 3 for each habitat type. And then you determine what those stewardship practices are, adding layers of habitat, increasing the forbs that are available there. So land stewardship for birds, we basically I talked about land stewardship, I talked about birds as indicators for success, and then we talked a little bit about some of the examples of birds and the bird requirements. And our book, if you're interested in our book, it's available through Texas A&M Press. You can buy it on Amazon, but I encourage you to buy it through A&M Press. They supported us for the years that it took to do it. If you actually go and purchase it online and use the code stewardship, you will get a 30% discount, which more than covers your mailing. So that and that way, but you can also support the press that helped us publish our book. I do have some upcoming events. They're at Fort Worth Audubon on the 12th. I got the Cross Timbers Native Plant Society on the 24th and in Weatherford, and then Dogwood Canyon Audubon and Cedar Hill on the 28th. So in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, if you're interested. Just to finish up, I dedicate all my presentations to the memory of my brother Ben, who's the guy with the fish, and to my son, who was killed 15 years ago, just before he was about to start his own wildlife conservation career. So, and actually, to just mention the book, all my royalties, which don't write a book to make money, but all my royalties from the book and any money that we make from selling books, that I make from selling books, goes to a conservation fund in my son's memory. So it goes back to doing conservation work. And if we got any time, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rufus. If anyone has any questions, and I wanted to mention too that Rufus and I discussed him possibly coming to the Wetland Center and not only presenting, but if you live nearby and you want to come in and ask a question or two about your own property and how you might attract a certain species, we may be able to accommodate you. Let us know if you're interested or contact us if that's something that you would like to learn about. I wanted to mention one thing too, before we get to any questions. I'm not seeing any in the chat yet, but also one little not often thought of implication of bird loss is anyone who has a garden knows you have to fertilize that garden. And when we lose our birds, we actually lose our soil health and the birds, feed the land feeds the birds. It's kind of a cyclical interaction. So healthy plants, healthy birds, increased biodiversity. It's a winning combination. Any questions? Let's see. Karen Pulowski's asking, do you have any suggestions for how to control RFUs without pesticides? And she said, great presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, so we typically, what we talk about in the book, and actually, and this is what I actually do consulting, wildlife consulting for folks, but when I talk to my own clients, I will say there's really a kind of a continuum. And it depends. If you're talking about a backyard, then actually when we have a lot of rain, the mounds come up to the surface and the queen and all the eggs are right there. Actually, they're from Brazil. That's part of their Amazon basin. They are adapted to flooding events, and that's the way they protect themselves. But that also makes them vulnerable. So you can actually go out, if it's just in your backyard, you could do this. If you've got 20 acres, it's probably not very practical, but you can go out and use boiling water. And at that time, when the mound's up and because the ground is saturated, is up, the queen's there and all the eggs, and it can be quite effective, but it is labor intensive. When we go beyond that, you really have to get into pesticides. And what I recommend there is we want to use the most specific and that we can. And I recommend a growth regulated hormone such as Extinguish. And this is an ant growth regulated hormone. And so, but it takes time. Those in that technique, it takes time for those mounds to be killed. It can take 6-8 weeks. But also one of the things that we recommend is doing a mound treatment. If you don't have a really intense infestation, don't broadcast the pesticide across the property. Do an individual mound treatment. I'll say one last thing you can do is also you can put it in pill bottles and you can drill and I think it's a 1/8 inch hole in it. And that way, if you're interested in harvest ants, which are the food for horned lizards, in protecting them, you can use them that way. Create little bait stations for fire ants that harvester ants can't get into. So we really, we probably have 50 different species of ants, in your area. And so in our area, we do, and it's only really one or two that we're really concerned about. And all the others are an important part of the ecosystem. So we want to be as specific as possible. So that's my
All right.
short and dirty on that.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Mm.
By the way, everybody, we will bring up information about how to get Rufus's book at the end of the seminar. And I see another question for you. I'll ask at the end, but we'll move on to Blaine. And I would like to introduce to you Blaine Carnes. He works with us at the Wetlands Center. And by the way, this is good information for people to know. Wetlands are as biodiverse and important as tropical rainforests because they do protect and provide habitat and food to so many different species, not just birds, but all kinds of things, insects and mammals, so on. So we're really happy to have this 2,000-acre wetland just 25 minutes from downtown Dallas. And we're really happy to have Blaine Carnes. He has been conducting research on birds, specific bird species, populations, their health on our wetland for quite a few years. So welcome, Blaine.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to talk a little bit about bird declines, how we keep track of some of those numbers, and go into the research I'm doing here at the wetland, both a little bit of an introduction to what I'm doing and some of the initial results we've had from the past 2 years of work. So Rufus mentioned that there have been long-term declines of birds in North America, somewhere on the order of 1/3 of the entire population of birds in North America has disappeared since we've started monitoring on a consistent basis in the 1960s. The paper that came out in 2019 that summarized all of this used data mainly from breeding bird surveys, but there are also some other methods of keeping track of bird numbers, such as Christmas bird counts and long-term banding projects. All of these have huge amounts of data over large areas, continent-wide, and so we've seen that bird numbers are decreasing throughout North America, not specifically in one area versus another. So banding programs like what I do here, we are catching and tagging birds to keep track of their numbers. So bird bands are a type of ID tag. They have an ID number, so if you catch a bird multiple times, you'll know which individual it is. I capture them carefully, mainly in traps called mist nets, handle them carefully. They do have some drawbacks. You're not covering a large area, but you are getting more detailed data than some of these other surveys. You're able to get information such as a bird's age, a bird's sex, their body condition, and knowing which individual is which. Survey methods like Christmas bird counts and breeding bird surveys, you don't necessarily know if you're seeing the same bird multiple times in multiple years. But for birds that are tagged, you do know that if you catch it multiple times. So how I catch birds and kind of what I do, I use traps that are called mist nets. I describe them as looking a bit like a volleyball net, but they're 40 feet long, 10 feet tall. Birds don't see them very well. I set them up before sunrise. I check them every 30 to 40 minutes all morning long, depending on weather conditions. Birds don't see them, they fly into them, and they drop into a pocket in the middle. What we see here on the left is a net that's rolled up. The very first slide that I had shows a net when it's open. They're very difficult to see. What I do once I check the nets, I put the birds into cloth bags so they can breathe. I bring them back to a central location, which is usually something informal like a table or off the tailgate of the back of my truck. I put the band on, I take information on how old they are, what sex they are, some things about their body condition. I take some measurements. Here you see a hummingbird on a scale. It's one of the few birds that you don't have to put in a container to measure. They get a little disoriented. So a lot of people like to ask how I tell age and sex in birds. It varies by species. Telling sex can be as easy as different plumage coloration. We've got a couple of indigo bunting wings here. These are both males. Female wings would be brown. Some species, there's a difference in size. Some species look identical with males and females, so you have to wait for the breeding season to tell sex on them. And for how to tell age, in most species of birds, that's molt pattern. Birds have to replace their feathers every year, and in general, young birds don't replace as many feathers as adults because it's energetically costly to do so. And in the first year of a bird's life, it's not going to replace all of its feathers in its annual molt. So here on the left, we have an adult male indigo bunting wing, and on the right, we have a 1-year-old male. On the 1-year-old male, you can see a number of brown juvenile feathers still on this bird's wing. So the reason it's important to collect data like age and sex on these birds is because the total numbers of birds are only part of the picture. This demographic data helps explain the changes in numbers. So here we've got a few different maps from data in a program called the MAPS program. It's a continent-wide bird monitoring program. On the left, we can see population change in Carolina wrens, which is a fairly common bird in different parts of the country over a 14-year span from the 90s to the mid-2000s. And in the middle and on the right, we have adult annual survival in these different regions and productivity, which is the number of juveniles that hatch in these different regions. So if you've got a decline in adult annual survival, but good productivity in a region, you'll have a decrease in numbers, and vice versa. If you have stable adult survival, but a decrease in productivity, you'll have a decline in these regions. So you can see on the first map, there are different population trends in these different regions. And the reason for that is based on differences in adult survival and productivity. So why is the John Bunker Sands Wetland Center a good study site for bird research? A lot of different reasons. For one, it's very good habitat for birds, and it's got steady management here as part of the phytoremediation process. For two, it's very good for birds. We have huge numbers of some species here. Christmas bird counts in the wintertime, we typically have somewhere around 300,000 red-winged blackbirds, which is a very common bird, but also a bird experiencing steep declines. Another example is during fall migration, we get absolutely astounding numbers of swallows. Some years we've had estimates of somewhere around 3 million swallows roosting in the wetland in the evenings, which is one of the highest concentrations of barn swallows anywhere in the world. There are roosts on wetlands in South America and South Africa that have higher numbers of the species than that. But as far as I know, this is the only spot anywhere in the world that gets these sorts of numbers for barn swallows in migration. Another reason that the Wetland Center is a great spot for bird research is we don't have a lot of hard demographic data from the middle of the country, especially during migration. A lot of migration studies have been concentrated along the coasts or at ecological barriers like the Great Lakes or out next to deserts that concentrate high numbers of birds. And there are fewer migration studies in places that don't cause birds to stop and wait before crossing. So it's good to have this data from a part of the country that doesn't get a lot of attention during the migration season. We also have a high number of target birds that are of conservation concern here, and both in the summer and in the winter and during migration. During the summer and winter phases of my project, there are about a dozen different species that are conservation concerned that I regularly catch and band and collect data on. Another reason that this is a great site for a research program is the education program here. We're able to show off science to the public, and we can also compare the data from here to a similar site nearby at Trinity River Audubon Center. So I mentioned that there are different seasonal phases of this project. In the breeding season, I am banding birds using a project called the MAPS protocol. In the non-breeding, it is the Mosey protocol, and in spring and fall, we're looking at migration. I will go into detail on each of these phases. The breeding season, we are doing the MAPS program, which stands for Monitoring Avian Productivity and Survivorship. It's a continent-wide program administered by a research group called the Institute for Bird Populations. I've done quite a bit of work with IVP over the last 15 years. What it does is people are catching and banding birds at year in and year out, somewhere between 300 and 400 locations throughout the US and Canada. And we're focusing mainly on migratory breeding species. So around here, that would be something like this white-eyed vireo, which is only here in the summertime. We're looking at their overall numbers, we're looking at their demographic trends, And we're able to analyze this data on a continent-wide scale, on a regional scale, and on a very local scale. In the wintertime, I'm using what's called the Mosey protocol, which is essentially the non-breeding season equivalent of MAPS. A lot of this is focused in Central and South America, but because in the southern half of the United States, we get a lot of the target species from the Mosey protocol, we can do Mosey here in North Texas. So it's looking at a lot of the same data as the MAPS program, but it's structured slightly differently. During the MAPS season, I come out here once every 10 days to catch and tag birds so that I don't disrupt birds when they're nesting. During the Mosey season, I come out here once a month and I band on 3 days consecutively. Mosey is also administered by the Institute for Bird Populations, and there are a lot of different regional partners involved in this. During migration, I am focused on what is called stopover ecology. So during migration, birds do it in a series of stages. Most songbirds don't fly all the way from point A to point B. They stop at sites along the way. So I am looking at how many birds stop here at the Wetland Center. What condition are they in when they arrive? What condition are they in the last time I catch them? So how long are they staying? How quickly are they fattening up? Birds are generally pretty lightweight because they have to fly, but when they're migrating, they eat like crazy. They go into what's called hyperphagy, where they are eating far more than what they need to maintain their body mass. They put on a lot of fat and they burn that fat for fuel when they migrate. So a bird can add maybe 50% of its body mass in 6 or 7 days, wait for the wind to blow in the direction it wants to go, take off at sunset, fly 300 miles in a single night, and then stop and repeat until it gets wherever it's going. And this can take a matter of weeks or a matter of months, depending on the species and how far they're going. So during migration banding, I'm in a different spot than I am during the summer and winter phases. The summer and winter phases of the program, I'm off a little bit outside of the main public area of the wetland. I'm closer to the river in a larger site because we need birds that are on their territories and we need multiple territories of species. During migration, because we're just looking at birds that are stopping here briefly, I'm set up very close to the center, right on the edge of the wetland, in a copse of trees. It doesn't have many territorial birds. Pretty much everything I catch is only passing through. So during the summer and winter phases of the project, I am comparing the banding data to Trinity River Audubon Center, which is located 15 miles to the northwest. So the reason for this comparison is Trinity River Audubon is a bit of an island of habitat. They are right next to the Great Trinity Forest along the Elm Fork of the Trinity River, but they're surrounded by urban development, and the site has been surrounded by development for decades. Whereas out here at the Wetland Center, it's more rural. Development is starting to occur in the area. So we are looking at if there's a difference between this rural site and a more urban location. And as development occurs and starts coming out in this direction around the Crandall area and Kaufman area, it may be interesting to see if the numbers here and the demographics here start to resemble Trinity River Audubon. We don't have enough information on that yet to say. We do know there are some slight differences between the two sites from the 2 years of data I have. In general, nesting success may be a little higher at Trinity River Audubon, but overall numbers are a bit higher here. So the reason that a study like this goes on for multiple years is, for one, in Texas, the difference between a wet year and a dry year can be colossal. Last year was extremely dry. This year was very wet. My numbers at my study sites here were almost double what they were last year, just due to the difference in rainfall and the amount of food that birds had available. The second reason is that birds have annual cycles. Most species have a little bit of a boom and bust cycle where they'll have a really high year of nesting success, and then it'll trail off a bit and then hit a low point, and then they'll cycle upward to another high year of nesting success. It shows trends over time. One of the things that you need multiple years of data for is it allows for natural turnover. So in theory, if everything is working as it should in a habitat, a bird that's on territory will reach the end of its lifespan and another bird of the same species will fill that territory. So you know that if the territory stays filled over time throughout multiple lifespans of birds in that territory, you'll know the habitat's in good shape. So the project here, we need a minimum of 5 years of data, hopefully longer if everyone's still interested and we can keep it funded. The longer a project like this goes on, the stronger the data set is and the more you can do with the analysis at the end. So year-to-year comparisons, here we are looking at wintertime data from the Wetland Center in the winter of 2022, 2023, and this past winter, the 23-24 winter. And what we're looking at here is essentially the demographic data from the most common species I was catching on the left, and on the right is showing roughly how many birds per hour I caught when the nets were open in each of the different months of the season. So I'll talk about the graphic on the right first. The first one we are looking at, we weren't able to band in November of the first year, so the captures were probably a little bit higher in December. That was the very first month of the project. So we were catching birds for the first time. They weren't used to the nets yet. And you can see there's a little bit of fluctuation throughout the winter. That January was right after a polar vortex, so some birds probably left the area before coming back. And in March, we were starting to get some early migrants, whereas this past winter, numbers were a bit more steady throughout the season. We didn't have that spike caused by the beginning of the project when the birds that are here every year didn't know the nets yet. The graphic on the left, looking at these comparisons from year to year, in general, it was pretty stable in terms of the ratio of young birds to adults in all of these species, except for yellow-rumped warblers, which are known to be somewhat eruptive. They can have really big winters sometime. And the 2022-23 winter was a pretty big winter for yellow-rumped warblers. So in the columns for those, you see a really high rate of both adults and young birds per unit of how much I was putting in effort for banding, and that dropped off pretty significantly in the second year. And that's just due to natural fluctuations in their population. Most of the other species were more stable. But by looking at multiple years worth of data, if we were just here in that first year, we think, wow, there are a lot of yellow-rumped warblers here. And the second year, there's no yellow-rumped warblers. So what happens in the third year banding data? Is it somewhere in between? Are we cycling up or are we cycling down for that species right now? That's why we need quite a few years of data to run a project like this. And then for site-to-site comparisons, here is summertime data from both the site here at the Bunkers Pond area and from Trinity River Audubon. We're looking at overall numbers and again, ratio of adults to young birds. And again, productivity, which is nesting success, was a little bit higher at Trinity River Audubon. Adults had a higher percentage here at the Wetland Center, which probably shows that habitat quality was a bit higher, but again, that's just 1 year of data. And we will be comparing for a few more years to see if these trends hold up. So some interesting data points that we've seen in these first 2 years of data are in migration banding, we seem to have a lot of molt stopover in the spring. A lot of birds will do a molt before they come north in spring migration, kind of sprucing up for breeding season, replacing feathers that have been damaged over the winter. It's most obvious in sparrows because we get a lot of Lincoln sparrows and white-throated sparrows. And it seems like a lot of young sparrows are stopping here for sometimes weeks in the spring to replace their feathers. We don't know a lot about this molt stage in birds. And so it's good to get data on this because we may learn a lot about what sort of habitat requirements these birds need when they're replacing their feathers. It's a lot of folks don't think about molt in birds, but molt is the one thing that all birds do on an annual basis. The three major phases in many species' lives on an annual basis are breeding, migration, and molt. Not all species breed every year, not all species migrate, but everybody does replace their feathers. And I could probably go on for quite some length about molt because it's what a lot of my published research is in. But I don't want to bore people, and I also don't want to get off track. But it's 2 years worth of data has showed a really high percentage of birds stop here and use the wetlands to go through this molt in the spring. And it'll be fascinating to see if that trend keeps up and should be able to get some interesting results on that over time. And then in the fall, we get a high number of young birds from species that are resident here that aren't known to migrate, like cardinals, that come through and stop and molt. The phase after young birds become independent is a bit of a black hole in terms of bird knowledge. We know less about that phase of a bird's life than any other stage of their lives. We don't know how far some of these young birds go. We don't know if they wander around and check out different locations before trying to find a territory of their own. And it would also help supplement some of that productivity data from the summer by seeing how many birds kind of from the surrounding area come through here in early fall looking for a territory. So that's another thing I'm hoping to look at with this research over the next few years. And another thing that I'm doing with this project is collaborating with some other studies. I am taking feather samples from many species and blood samples from a few species for a project called the Bird Gene Escape Project that's based out of Colorado State University. What they're doing is using this genetic material to build regional genetic maps of bird populations continent-wide and many different species. The reason for this is because within species of birds, where these different regional breeding populations are in the summertime and where they go in the wintertime, we can actually look at what's affecting migratory birds on both the breeding grounds and the wintering grounds very specifically. Bird Gene Escape Project has done some great work and published some really, really interesting work looking at where birds go in the wintertime by collecting samples both on the breeding grounds and the wintering grounds. I'm doing some work with graduate students. There was a graduate student from University of North Texas who is taking data on northern cardinal diets here with me the first year that I was working by collecting fecal samples and analyzing the genetic content of those fecal samples. She ended up switching to painted buntings a little bit after that, but some of her initial work was with cardinals from here. I'm hoping to do some work called MODIS tracking on a species called Harris's sparrow that's here in the wintertime. They're a species of conservation concern, and what these MODIS trackers do is they send out a constant radio signal that can be picked up by automated telemetry arrays. So someone puts out an antenna that constantly collects data on these tags. One of these antennas is over at Trinity River Audubon. We've discussed possibly getting some funding to put one here, which would be an interesting thing to do. But we're hoping to get the permits cleared for putting these tags out, not necessarily this winter, but maybe next winter. And I'm also doing some training with other area banders there's a station at Louisville Lake Environmental Learning Area that's coordinated by UNT. There's a station up at Bird Museum. And I've talked some with those folks about just some basic banding training. We may end up doing a banding workshop here at some point. That's something we've discussed. Then something that I've really been interested in with this project is outreach. The education program here is top tier. There's a lot of school groups that come out, and we're able to show folks science in action by having school groups come by the banding station, see birds, hear a little bit about what I'm doing, the information I'm collecting. In the last 2 years, we've had a little over 1,500 visitors at this site and at Trinity River Audubon combined. That number will probably reach over 2,000 by the end of this fall migration. Most kids seem to be pretty excited about seeing birds up close. I think most adults are pretty excited about seeing birds up close too. I've had a number of volunteers who have come out with me who have learned to band. Some of these have been students, some of these have been other researchers. But one of the reasons I was most excited to start this program here was the potential for outreach and showing people exactly what I'm doing when I'm talking about banding birds and doing this research. I'd like to acknowledge all the supporters of this project, the current and former staff of the Wetland Center, and all the partners of the Wetland Center, the North Texas Municipal Water District, the Rosewood Corporation, and the Sands family, the partnership with Trinity River Audubon that's allowed me to compare the multiple sites, all the volunteers who have worked with me, the Institute for Bird Populations for being one of the places I've sent my data to, and of course, all the birds who I've bothered by catching them and handling them. You can see sometimes here, like with this cardinal, they're not too happy about it, but they all get sent on their way, and they've all got a little piece of jewelry that they'll have for the rest of their lives. So I'll know they are if I see them again. So if anyone has any questions, I'm open to it.
And I just want to highlight, I'm sure what everybody observed is that Blaine is doing extremely important research, because if we understand more details about what's happening to our birds and how we can help them and get data about where they're going, how long they're staying at places like the wetland, how much weight they're putting on. And as you can see, he's very comprehensive in his work. He's really tracking a lot of different things, from genetics to, again, body weight to number of species, et cetera. We are very volunteer oriented at the Wetlands Center. We would love to have you if you're interested in either helping Blaine, perhaps in bringing birds from the nets over to him carefully after being trained, or maybe in some other way helping to broadcast the importance of this data that he's gathering, because it really is groundbreaking data that he's pulling together. So please let us know if you might have an interest in participating in that way. And then we do have a few questions. Let's just see here. One person asked, Blaine, are there any monitoring things like this in Tarrant County? Anything like this happening in Tarrant?
To my knowledge, there aren't any banding programs going on in Tarrant County right now. The locations that I know of in North Texas that are conducting banding programs are right here at Louisville Lake Environmental Learning Area and at the Herd Museum up in McKinney.
And then someone, let's see, what just recommended, could you put your chat up there, who recommended where Blaine might speak? Does anyone see that in the chat? I saw it a second ago and it disappeared. But somebody has a suggestion. We'll check on that for you, Blaine, about where they were very enthused by your presentation. Maybe there are other places that you can present this information. And yes, please contact us if you're working with the university or even a local group that would like this very valuable information that Blaine's collecting. Yes, we have recorded this. So for those of you that have asked for a recording, yes, we'll get your recording. Again, just send us a message, email us and ask for a link. And so here it is. Does Blaine ever give presentations to Audubon or Texas Master Naturalist chapters?
Not yet, but I have been asked about it. We're working out the scheduling for me possibly giving a presentation at Dogwood Canyon next year.
Okay. And excellent. And I have here, I guess this is from Jade. Thank you, Jade. She's saying she plans to post this to our YouTube account, and she's first going to edit it and then she'll post it. So she'll probably send you that link. We did have another question that's kind of interesting. So someone asked about the spraying for the West Nile virus. Is that affecting our birds? And I guess that's a question for either of you, Blaine or Rufus. What are your thoughts? Just quickly, because I know we're near the end of our time, so maybe a quick answer.
That's a good question, and we don't actually know. I don't know anyone who has done any detailed work on looking at spraying for West Nile and its impact on birds.
Okay, thank you. One other quick answer here. Somebody asked, are wind turbines, some people say they're really unhealthy for birds. They're asking you, Rufus and or Blaine, if you can answer quickly, do wind turbines have a real impact on birds, or is it minor? What are your thoughts, or what does the research show?
It depends on the species. If you wanted to say something, Rufus, you can go ahead.
No, that's an excellent point, which it's, where are the wind turbines and the kinds of birds that are impacted? They definitely do impact them, but how does that relate to the overall decline in bird populations? I mean, there's things like, dark sky issues or building strikes that are probably, at least in, to the research that's been done, that are more significant. Let me just mention one thing, which is it's really important what Blaine's doing, because there are things that we still don't know, basic biology about bird species. And it's amazing. I mean, people think, well, you must know everything. And it's like, no, we don't. And so it's really important, projects like what Blaine's doing to add to our really fledgling knowledge about birds. So that's really important.
To add a bit more detail to the wind turbine question, it has impacts more on juvenile raptors, things like hawks. By far, however, the big impact of things that birds run into is glass. Large buildings, large windows. Wind turbines are minimal compared to that.
I'll add another point to that, which is the issue, and as Blaine mentioned, it's like species specific. So lesser prairie chickens in West Texas are really impacted by wind turbines, mainly because they look like trees. They look like something that predators can roost on, and that's a real problem for grassland species like lesser prairie chickens. So it's very species specific as to the kind of impact that it can have.
Okay, thank you. And it does sound like we need to do more research on that, on both of those topics. Thanks for asking that. So someone said, can we see the birds at the Wetland Center? Where does Blaine do this work? Come to our Wetland Center. This is where Blaine is doing a lot of his research. He's here a lot. We get recorded.
Absolutely. You saw that I keep track of the number of visitors that I receive. If you show up, we'll be keeping track of you.
Yeah, come on down, and it's beautiful. And also we do have at least once a month, we might even go to twice a month, we do have bird tours. So usually early in the morning, come on out and join a board tour on our boardwalk and enjoy that. So thank you, everybody. We're ending right about time.
I did see one question that looked like
no.
it was for me. Someone asked how often I catch birds multiple times.
Okay.
In general, on most days, as long as weather isn't conducive to birds really moving in migration, about 1/3 of what I catch is a bird that I've already banded.
Okay, yeah, so this Saturday, there's going to be a bird tour. Thank you, Jade, for letting me know. And thank you to Jade Reynolds. She is our event person, and she has been doing a phenomenal job. Here's our full calendar. Jade also started with us as a volunteer, and we're just so thankful to have her help. She's done so many great things for us. So thank you, Jade. And yeah, come on out, visit. We're fairly close to Dallas. It's not long to get here, and we'd love to have you come. So yeah. So, and here's something Katie Bartush is saying, Blaine, please contact NTMN to present your research. Thank you for re-saying that, Katie. So if you know who that is, North
Texas Master Naturalists.
There you go. North Texas Master Naturalists. So that's from Katie Bartush. Thank you, Katie. I hope you guys get in touch. All right. And again, we're going to have a live birding thing at the Wetland Center. So keep an eye out. We'll be getting back with both Rufus and Blaine. So you'll learn more about that in the next few months. And here's our fall calendar. We also have our major annual event and fundraiser on November 16th. It's called WOW, Wings Over the Wetland. Please join us. It's going to be a lovely, lovely evening. Lots of wonderful people, interesting presenters. Yeah, come on and meet your neighbors. All right. Thank you, everybody.